Good morning, everyone, or afternoon, or whatever time of day it is. I'm here again with Vipan. Hey, Vipan, how are you?
Good morning, Simon. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, or good evening, whatever. Yeah, we're assuming everyone's just listening to us in the UK, but who knows?
Yeah, who knows? And we're continuing our series of topics, and today we have, as you put in your message to me this morning, the cheerful subject of death. And it's one of my favorite subjects. So, I this is for me one of the best things to talk about and explore. So I'll start today, Vipan, because you're a fascinating person because you have contemplated your own mortality and you have sort of semi-stared death down, for a certain period of time. I'll remind the listener, or tell the listener, that I believe it was your third heart attack, when you had a 40-minute wait there, really believing that you were going to die. And so you're someone who has faced death and also seen your life transform as a result of going through that experience. So my question for you is, what was that like, and how has your life changed, and in what way did having that experience, in what way has it transformed you and your life?
Okay, some pretty big questions there, Simon, from a big guy. So I'm not surprised. But yeah, I mean, Jesus, if I could say such a word. 40 minutes is a long time when you're in a lot of pain. And so I didn't think I was going to make it, or I thought something obviously bad is happening to me, and did I really want to make it? So you have to think about everything. Just shoots through your head. So many things shoot through your head at that time, and I think one of the things I was contemplating or trying to get my head round during that time was, what am I going to do if I survive? If I'm lucky enough to survive, what you can't really carry on the same as before, because you've just had this. I've had this near-death experience, which so many things shoot through you, and you and they do say your whole life flashes through you. Yes, because then you start thinking and about things that, whether they were important or not important, did you really need to spend that much time maybe doing stuff that wasn't important? There's a whole load of things that I needed to reevaluate in my life, and I promised myself, and not least of which is, what am I doing with my life? Here I am, lying on the gym floor, some part of me hoping the pain would end one way or another, but then thinking, well, geez, did I really spend my life in the best way possible? And was it really worth it? So I was determined, and if I did survive, I thought, gosh, as you said at the beginning, Simon, this is my third escape. I've got to do something. Something obviously needed to be done. Someone's telling me to do something differently and giving me a final or a third opportunity to do something differently. And for me, so there's a number of lessons, and I have to admit, though, Simon, that penny doesn't always drop immediately. I mean, it did take me quite a long time to get my act together to actually realize what I needed to do. I mean, okay, so you're grateful that you survive initially, and then that euphoria dies, as it were, and then it's a very real danger that you go into lethargy, and then your mind goes into dark places, as we both know. Yeah, and I struggled mentally trying to think, what is it, what I need, what is it, and I felt bitter, angry. Your emotions, it is like dying, or you grieve, actually. So you grieve. I think, thinking about it now, retrospectively, you're grieving in a way over your old life, as it were, or your past, with the resultant emotions and anger and frustration that brings up. And then when you, it's like it's like catharsis. You have that, and you expel and expunge, get rid of that inside of yourself. And once you've done that, I think that's when you, and like for me, then I have a realization, and slowly dawns upon you what you need to. You get clarity is basically what happens, Simon. So I don't know if this is similar to stuff that you went through as well, but for me, definitely needed some time. You can't rush into saying, yeah, I'm going to do this as soon as I recover. But I think it takes time, and it took me time to realize and to think about things differently, and also realize importance of certain people in your life much more. You take things for granted. So there's a number of lessons which we could talk about, but for me, yeah, it did make a massive difference, but not immediately. And it's only now that I'm not now, but it took me years, Simon, to learn the lessons of what I went through. Whether I'm a slow learner, or you tend to fight, your personality. I'm a very, very stubborn mule type individual, and thinking I can carry on, but you can't, and you have to make some changes. But I think you cannot fail to be moved or have a major rethink about yourself and your priorities and the people around you once you go through that experience. But it does give you a different perspective on life, though. The point is, I guess the other thing that I want to mention, and I'm going to let you talk in a minute because I've witted on for a bit, but I guess you tend to think about death differently thereafter, and again, it's that catharsis. So then you're no longer really afraid of. For me, once you've been that close, you don't really fear death, and I think you live your life differently as a result of that. And I think some people go through their whole life fearing death, and they live their life in a certain way because they fear consequences, or they fear death in a certain way. So they don't think about it, and then they live their life a certain way, being afraid, which I also think is not a good way to live your life.
Yeah, I really like that, Vipan. And I wonder, if people are not afraid of death, but they're literally in ignorance of the fact that they're going to die. I found, I wouldn't even know where to start with my journey, but I did a very high dose psychedelic journey with psilocybin, and experienced my own. I was in the woods in Australia in a cabin, and died, like literally died, stopped breathing. My awareness retracted through the center of my mind, and I left Simon Cusden behind, like leaving a character within a play. And it wasn't a particularly pleasant death. I had unfinished business with that character, but I was very at peace with the fact that I was moving on too, because and for whatever reason, there was a lot of peace there. And then I was retracted back into this body during the journey, with an awareness that I had another chance to finish the business of being Simon Cusden. And I was immediately aware of what that would require. I was in Australia at the time. I knew I had to. It was like immediately a download of, right, I need to go home to England. I need to repair the relationships with my family. I need to take responsibility. I need to heal my body. I need to take better care of myself. And that all came in one very high dose psilocybin journey. And, that has rejuvenated my life in such an extraordinary way, just that one journey. But I think the maintenance of that, I think I was helped in the integrating of those lessons, because I also found some Buddhist meditation, which is you meditate upon death every single morning. And now the hardcore Buddhist practitioners, the Dzogchen practitioners, would go, They would literally imagine themselves being killed in a car accident and witnessing the windscreen in slow motion going through their heads, their brains. So if you're being guided in this, you would imagine your brain splattering everywhere, so that you're training yourself to remain aware during a physical death, so that your awareness can then be centered for the move into the next body. This is Buddhist thought.
Wow. Yeah.
But what it also does is to contemplate death every single morning, for me, has done something which you just talked about, which is not taking things for granted. Because the more you think about it, the more it's actually insane how little we're aware of death. And it is the only thing that is definitely going to happen, right? No one wants, it's very uncomfortable for people to accept that. It's definitely going to happen. You are going to die. I am going to die. But more than that, there's absolutely no guarantee that we'll see tomorrow.
Yeah.
There's no guarantee. And now you've lived on that. You've lived that. And that's a gift that you get, because especially, I imagine when you have a heart attack. I met a guy who had a little heart attack, and he didn't have anxiety really before the heart attack, but now he could barely move. I watched him. He was so crippled and paralyzed by fear, because he's so afraid that his heart could go any moment, and it left him in a really, but I sort of tried to say to him, you're touching the truth about life, is that it's extraordinarily fragile, and we can go any moment. And you've got to ask yourself every single day, if I died today, am I happy with the job that I'm doing? Am I happy with the relationships that I'm in? Am I happy with the communication and the way that I'm talking to the people that I love? Am I happy with, and I think that that's an incredibly powerful way of living, but it requires the shattering of ignorance. And I'll tell you now, there's so much of it, because I've got like my 4 or 5 people I can talk to about death, but most people, my dad just turned 60, and in the yogic culture, the son's job is when they sort of get ready for fatherhood. So I've just become a dad. My dad's become granddad. In the yogic culture, in Ayurveda, it's my role to get my dad ready for death, right? And usually what would happen is the son would then take their father on a pilgrimage, and after a life of serving the family, it's their time to reconnect with God and the infinite. And I'm now trying to talk to my dad about death. He's got wrapped up in family, and I'm like, Dad, you're going to die. And he's like, I don't know, Dad. You might have 30 years left. What do you want these last 30 years to be about? Because you've given your life to the family. Now there's grandkids, sure, but you have some space and time to be able to explore what life is, and you're going to die. But the uncomfortability that people have even talking about death, it's a great conversation to talk about, because it's going to happen.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think why do people fear talking about death? When you say, Simon, so correctly, that it is inevitable, regardless of status, wealth, creed, whatever, it's going to happen to all of us.
More than that, though, Vipan, once you've awakened out of that sort of ignorance, you sort of look into the crowd a bit, and you go, "Oh, I can't believe." Rest in peace, Shane Warne. 56 years old, not a healthy guy. I can't believe he died. It's like, really? People die all the time. Again, God save her soul, rest in peace, the Queen. I can't believe the Queen's dead. It's like, she's a 96-year-old woman.
Yeah.
You can't believe it? Like, really? And then people don't want to be woken up out of that, because, and they're like, oh, I'm so sad.
Well, it's change, Simon. A lot of people do not deal well with change. And obviously, there's no bigger change that's going to happen than death.
Change, yeah.
There is a permanent change on a humongous scale. And if people can't even cope with the small things in life, small changes like a change in routine, or they get stressed and fearful about losing their seat on the tube every morning and someone else sitting
Yeah.
there in front of them. How the hell are they going to cope with thinking, well, hang on, mate, or young lady, or whoever, that you might
Yeah.
not get off that tube journey, and you might not even make it tomorrow. That it's it. They take most people take every day, and they treat their life as some sort of disposable asset.
Yeah.
They're like a paper bag or a packet of crisps. They use and abuse it, and then just throw it away. I think if they actually thought 5 minutes, I think one thing that life, when you have an experience like we have, Simon, life, death teaches us, near death teaches us that every day is precious.
It's such
And I
an
think
amazing teacher.
yeah, in fact, you could actually say, in fact, who is a better, who could, you couldn't ask for a better coach than a death coach.
No.
Imagine that guy comes over to you every morning and taps you on the shoulder and starts saying to you, "Hey, actually, have you actually thought about your life?
One day
Because, you know,
closer.
it's one day.
You're one day
Yeah.
closer.
Now, are you doing things the right way? Are you really
Yeah.
appreciating every day? Yeah. Are you? What? I mean, I think what the other thing that you've got to realize is what I realize is one thing I was frightened of when I was lying there, and I was frightened. There's
Yeah.
no doubt about it. I'm not denying it. What am I frightened about? I was going to miss out on. It's fear of missing out. It's that FOMO. What are you going to lose? What am I going to lose? And I was thinking, God, all those memories. Like you, Simon, my children were very, very small then. I had 3 children under 5 the third
Mm.
time. So all those all those memories, you start thinking straight ahead 20 years. I'm going to miss all their birthdays, the graduations, the marriages, being a grandfather, all those future memories and happy memories that you're not going to be there for, and spend that time with your wife
Yeah.
and your loved ones. It's incredibly painful. But then if people actually woke up every morning and thinking, wow, today is a special gift. I've made it today, and I'm going to
Yeah.
enjoy every day. I'm sure people would behave differently, both for themselves, towards themselves, and to those people that they love. I mean, all those trivial arguments we all have in our lives. Does it really matter when you're lying there on your, and all those things that you've got stressed about, which were so important, apparently? It all pales into complete insignificance, Simon, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. And you can read. I mean, there's plenty of accounts of people's biggest regrets on their deathbed. Like, it's very well documented, the
Yeah.
things that people regret on their deathbed. And you never, ever, ever hear of anyone regretting not making more money, or you
Spending
never
more
hear
time
that.
at work.
It's or spending more time at work. It is always the number one regret is always relationships and friendships and family. It's always that. And I can vouch for that. I mean, that's all. As I left my body behind, and it was a realer experience than doing this with you right now. It was high, because that's what happens when you do that much psilocybin. The only thing that I could think about was that I hadn't left my relationships in the right way, and there's nothing more meaningful than that, because once, like, I've had direct experience. There's something beyond, right? Consciousness lives on. Quantum physics is now proving consciousness lives on, right? That's a fact. And for me, that's a direct experience that I've had, and more than once now. So if you die, Vipan, today, I've got no issue. I'm not afraid for you, right? Death only really sucks for the people that are left behind.
Yeah.
Right. And so when we get sad because someone's died, I'm going to say this, like, it's a little bit selfish. I mean, like, it's a little bit selfish, because people go, oh, I'm so. It's a little bit sort of like, what are you sad about that we're going to miss that person, right? And that's but you're not sad for the person, because, and I think this is important, because if I die today, my consciousness will go wherever it goes, and what will be left behind will be you, Jess, my boys, my dad, my friends, and the memory that I leave behind. I'll be wherever I'll be, but my memory will be left behind. Now, there's something else that's really amazing. Like I don't know if you've ever read Marcus Aurelius' Meditations.
Some of it, yeah.
His stuff on death is incredible. The Stoic stuff on death, because he also says shadows and dust. This is the thing that actually is hilarious when you really contemplate death too. Oh my God, we're all going to be. Do you know how insignificant we are?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do you know in 100 years' time your family won't even remember you?
Yeah.
Like you're going to be someone's great great granddad. Do you remember your great great granddad? Maybe if you go and do a bit of digging. But even if let's say for some reason I make £1 billion and I create a company and we feed the homeless and blah 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 blah. In 200 years' time, it'll barely be remembered.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Jordan, they say he's the greatest athlete ever. In 200 years' time, people won't even remember him. He'll be gone, and that's the great thing. Like that's the Buddhist impermanence. Or 500 years or 1,000 years. Like nature will take over. All the cathedrals that we've built, nature will take over, and eventually this planet will die, and then eventually the sun will explode. Right? Nothing is going to last. Nothing we do lasts apart from what we are.
So what you're saying is, yeah. So what you're saying is, then we are a mere speck on the life of a universe and in the history of the universe. So therefore, I think so. The point is that we are afraid. A lot of us are afraid of living our life because we're afraid of the consequences. But then, if you look at the consequences and look at the bigger picture, we are a little speck of
the teacher I like says we're a pop-up on a desktop. When you get those pop-ups, that's what one lifetime is. Now it's a paradox, isn't it? Because there's nothing more insignificant, but there's nothing more significant to think that just for a moment we existed. That's phenomenal to contemplate. So the flip side of death is once you start to think about death, you start thinking about what life is.
Yes.
To be alive. There's a great saying. Alan Watts says the purpose of life is just to be alive. There's no purpose. It's literally just to be alive.
Well, you hear this story, Simon, that those people who have 1 month to live or 1 week, if you ask them all the stories are that everything, their whole life is suddenly transformed and they have an urgency. But more than that, it's their senses that seem to be awakened as well. Beforehand they would ignore, birds singing. What's that? Then now everything, the tiniest bird song is like an amazing crescendo.
Yeah.
And the beauty around them that verse before they would never notice the trees or the greenery and how lucky they were to see trees. But it's just as they appreciate. What I'm trying to say is that appreciation of everything is heightened 1,000,000 times, which is how we should be. Every morning you wake up and you see all around you the beauty. I think we should live life as though we know that it's, as we said earlier, it's not taken for granted. We've only got a month to live. It could be our last day. So we should enjoy things every day. We should find, that's why we've talked about in the past, Simon, the ability to be grateful, and we should be grateful and we should write about it. And we've talked about journaling.
Well, think about what sort of day you're going to have and I'm going to have because we've had this podcast this morning, right? Because so we're contemplating death, which is revivifying our sense of life. Like we're now going to listen to the birds because we've gone, this is what the morning should be about. It's to consider how amazing it is to be alive because of how fragile life is and how easy it can be taken away. You have to get over some fear first in doing that. I was going to say something else about being alive and I've just...
it'll come back to you. But we think a lot of us are fearful because it's the fear of the unknown. I think that's why. I think people don't want to talk about death or even think about their own death because they imagine it's going to be painful.
This is why, Vipan, I reckon everybody needs to go and do 30 grams of psilocybin in the woods. I just think that psychedelics, end-of-life therapy, psychedelics will, a high enough dose of psychedelics will remove some of that fear, and that's actually what's happening now. My wife and I have both done fairly and a few of our like close friends, and we know a lot of people who have done high dose psilocybin, not recreational, like we're talking about your knees are knocking before you take it, sort of like dose. Like it's a frightening doorway to go through, because, and it should be, because it's like death. But we have noticed that there's a couple. We saw a funny meme the other day, and it was like, there's people who have done psilocybin, there's people who haven't, and you're an interesting person because you've almost had the psilocybin. You've had an experience that psilocybin will give you, but without having to have a heart attack and without having to potentially die. Like psilocybin's this, like, you get to have a practice run, and and then actually a lot of, if you practice properly, a lot of the Buddhist meditations will also give you a practice run. So in theory, I mean, I'm not doing them at the moment, but in theory, the meditations that I've practiced over the last few years give you a practice run. And because there are people that have been through the death process, I mean, Buddhism's, I'm just going to try and move this, get the sun out my, I don't know if I can move this right now. Does that help? No. It's the sun on my face.
Oh, no sun here. Amazing.
So Buddhists, the believers in reincarnation, which is someone will die and be reborn into a body. I mean, there's overwhelming evidence for that. But there are the death process has been documented in Buddhism, so you can practice it. Like there are the Egyptian book and the Tibetan Book of the Dead document the death process, which is, it's not a big deal. Death is a part of life, and they don't take it that seriously, which means they don't take life that seriously, because you're going to die, and it might come tomorrow, but it might not. But the most important thing is to be ready, and then to live life in the right way, and that's it. To be ready to die.
I think I like that. Live life in the right way by thinking, and also for me, I mean, you've got to have a sense of humor. I think for me, I think most of us have noticed people take life far too seriously, and they don't see the joy and the funny side of things. And so you miss so much about life if you don't laugh about it as well, Simon. And I think that's what I've learned.
We've got to wrap up, Vipan, unfortunately. I think we should talk about death on the next one, and let's continue this, because I'd like to talk about death again. I think we've got a longer conversation we can have. There's no one's getting out alive. I like that one. It's like no one's making it out of this thing alive.
Yeah. There's no escape hatch.
No, everybody's going to die. But I'll leave on this. And maybe I can leave you with this. Maybe I can leave this with you. Maybe between now and the next podcast, maybe you can do something in addition to your journaling and come back and tell me what it's been like. And I would love you to do this, actually, is to spend a few minutes every day, and if there's some fear comes up, really have faith that it's okay to consider the death of your loved ones, and to consider that, because and I'll do the same, because if I wake up every morning and I think to myself, this could be my wife's last day alive.
Yeah.
Oh, mate. Like, that's really profound. There's a guy called Ogmandino, and he had an exercise, which is, he's great, by the way. You should YouTube him. He's an old school success speaker. Okay. And he said, if you want to completely rejuvenate your life, walk out the door every morning. And he says, I want you to imagine that you know a secret. Every single person that you interact with, imagine that you know that it's their last day alive. They don't know, but you know that they will die today. How would you interact with the lady in the grocery store?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, if you how would you interact with everybody if you knew that you might be the last person that they speak to? And he said, if you do that for a week, you become a completely different person, because you become aware of the impermanent, fragile nature of life. And we treat people awfully because we just have this, like, it's all just going to go on forever. But so many people we've spoken to even in the last month wouldn't have made it, and COVID's brought that close home. Yeah. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to reconnect with that.
All right, let's do that, Simon. Yeah, maybe that's a good idea.
Do you want to keep talking about this next week?
We could find so much more to talk about. Yeah, mind you, I don't know if the listeners would want to take an hour of death.
The listeners need an hour of death. It's our social
It's us.
responsibility, Vipan. This is all we're talking about now. This is it. We're just talking about death now.
Death. Every podcast, we're
I think you know what I'm talking about. I mean, if I was ever going to be a stand-up comedian, I would just talk about death because I think it's hilarious.
Oh my God. Yeah.
I thought, honestly, I messaged you this morning and I thought, how hilarious would it be if I die in the gym on the way to doing a death podcast?
Oh my God. Ultimate irony.
It'd be so funny.
Maybe, yeah. I'm not sure if Jess would find it that funny though. That's
she probably no. Jess wouldn't find it funny, but there's a part where Jess knows she would find it a little bit funny. Speaking of Jess, I better get back. Let's say goodbye to the listener.
Goodbye, listeners. Lovely to see you. And
I hope you make it to next week.
Yes, stay well.